Okay, looks good. So, I'm Adam, and I'm a software engineer turned activist. I'm one of the co-founders of the Public Knowledge Workshop, as Mushon said. For those of you who don't know us, this is a cool NGO. We focus on building websites that provide access to government data, focused on transparency of government activities, and with a lot of stuff. I'll show you some of it a little bit later, but I want to start at the beginning. I want to talk about democracy. You know, it's been around for quite some time. I don't think we really know how to use it. I mean, it's better than the alternatives, that's for sure, but it really relies upon a very big assumption. And the assumption is that we know how to answer this following question. This is the big assumption. Are they doing a good job? Are the representatives that we've chosen, that are running the government, are they doing a good job in what they're doing? And the real question is, can we really evaluate what they're doing without someone telling us, without some newspaper or some other people trying to convince us that they're doing a good job? Because if we can't really know if they're doing a good job, then the whole system is, is down the drain, because we better choose some kind of king or monarch that rules, because otherwise it doesn't really work. So it turns out that there is a way for us to somehow evaluate if they're doing a good job, and that way is using a document called the budget. These budgets are sort of a way to shed some light into what the government is doing. It's not a silver bullet, but it's by far the best way for us to evaluate what they're doing. But usually when I talk about budgets, people give me that look. Some of you have that look right now. It looks like that. What is a budget exactly? And this is a good question, because when people think about budgets, they think about numbers and OMG math, and they like lock down. So to give you some sense of what is a budget, don't read into that, I made it up. Budget is a list of items that describe, each item describes one activity of the government per year. So for example, if we talk about higher education, then we'll have that activity in the budget. We'll know how much resources the government is going to put into that activity. Resources can be money, can be personnel, and other resources. It should tell us why the government decided to put that amount of resource into that activity. And by the end of the year, it should tell us how those resources were actually used, who got the resources, if they were paid for salaries or for buying stuff. And if we didn't use all the resources, or maybe used too much, then why that happened. So this is a budget. But and when you look at budgets, you actually have 3 points of view for reviewing them. You can look at them from the point of view of who got the money, which suppliers, which government workers got the money. You can look at it from the point of view of where the money is coming from. It's also called financing. This usually means regulations, taxes, bonds that the government issues that finance the government's work. But I'm going to focus on the last bit, which is the budget life cycle, because what's interesting for me is to look at the government policy, and the budget's life cycle is usually talks about how the budget is born, from the point that the government officials decide how much fund is allocated to which activities, and by the end how it's used. So we're going to focus on the life cycle, although to fully understand the budget we actually need to look at from these 3 points of view. But the main issue with the budgets is that budgets are really hard to understand, and this is from a multitude of reasons. First one is that they contain lots of data. It's not a small Excel file that you can somehow play with it and get a sense of it. Even in Israel, we have over 15,000 different activities that the government funds, and it's really hard to get a grasp of the data without using a visualization. So it's a little bit of a cycle here. And this is only when looking at the budget. If you look at the spending data, which is all the suppliers that the government paid, then you get vast amounts of data. So this is one issue. The other one is that budgets do require some domain-specific expertise. You need to know a little bit about how government works. You need to know a bit about how budget works. You need to know about a little bit accounting, because there are some technical terms there. So you can really look at the budget as an ordinary citizen, so to speak, and understand what the budget, how the budget works. So you need somehow to mediate that complexity when you do a visualization. And maybe the main issue, and in some countries I guess it's more an issue than in others, that budgets hold secrets. And those secrets are, I don't know if any of you remember the final scene from Indiana Jones, where they want to hide the Ark of the Covenant, Aron Brit. Okay, so they put it in a large, put it in a large warehouse with lots of boxes, and they say, okay, they're never going to find it here. So the budget is somehow like this large warehouse with a lot of boxes, and if the government wants to hide something within, it's not very hard to do. So budgets hold secrets, and part of what we have to do is to uncover those secrets and to somehow make these secrets shine out of all the boring other stuff. So what is the solution? Well, I'm going to talk about a specific solution called visualization. But how does the visualization answer or deals with all the complexity? The true answer is usually it doesn't. And what I'm going to show you will amaze you. So this is an example, an example website. It's called Where Does My Money Go? It's one of the more well-known websites for showing budget data. It's built in the UK, showing UK budget. And I'm showing it as an example, but it's really more like a prototype for almost every budget website in the world. Almost all of them approach the problem in a very similar way. So what you can see here, is a sort of a pie chart. It doesn't look like a pie chart, but it is a pie chart. You can call it a cookie chart if you want to stay in the realm of pastries. But what it shows you is the whole budget as a whole. It's a central circle, and then you can dive inside specific activities, and you can see how the whole is separated into specific activities. For example, for example, we can see how helping others is 15 billion, but running the country is only 2 billion for that specific county. We can compare it to a different county and see here we have 268 million pounds for railroads, but here we have 1 billion pounds for railroads in that other county. So I guess, I don't know. And we can see that helping others is a little bigger than health, so I don't know if that's important. So what I get from this kind of chart is I get a lot of information, right? There's a lot of data and get a lot of numbers, and it's very pretty. I feel that I should be understanding something from this chart, but in fact I'm not understanding anything. I'm really getting the feeling that if all that effort was made to make this data accessible and I'm not understanding anything, then either I'm very stupid or this is very complex and I shouldn't be doing that and I should go do something else. So in some way this chart is really discouraging me from trying to understand the budget, because I don't have any context or any way to evaluate if these numbers are actually correct. For example, if for example the amount of money for transport was double than it should have been, and the amount of money for helping others was half, I wouldn't have been able to know that, because it would have looked just the same. I don't know if the numbers are bigger than they should or smaller than they should. So this is a good example of being a bad example, actually. So you know what I mean. It's really almost useless, and I feel pretty comfortable trash talking this website because I made the same mistakes when I started handling budget data of Israel. I tried to just throw in it all the visualization tools that I know and hopefully get something from it. And in fact, I only got the opposite. So what do we really want to know? What kind of answers do we really want the visualization to give us? And the previous sites didn't give us. So first of all, we want to know if this is a good budget. And good in the sense that it follows my values and my beliefs on what should be done in the country. This is one way to look at the budget, but another way is to look at the budget and ask: is this a professional budget? Are the assumptions that the budget is based on, are they correct? Are they taking too many risks or maybe not enough risks? Are the projections for income that are too optimistic or maybe too pessimistic? So was this done professionally? What changes did they make? I voted for a government to make some change. Did they introduce any changes? Did the changes that they make somehow in line with their promises? What if I voted for the other guys? What changes would they have made? And lastly, is there a way that I can affect the budget, somehow influence on what is done? This is what I want to know when I look at such a visualization. And I didn't get any of these answers when I looked at the very pretty website that I just showed you. So, what's missing? And when I talk about what's missing, there are actually three aspects that such a visualization needs to show in order to fully grasp and fully understand a budget. So, I'll talk about the three of them. First of all is, why is the structure of the budget like it is? When we talk about the structure, we saw that the budget is sort of like a tree. It has a root that is the entire budget for the country, but then it's split up to branches, for example, defense and maybe social services, maybe education. Inside education, you have higher education and kindergartens, etc., etc. It's like a tree. So why does it look like it is? Who made that decision, and is that important? Secondly is how we arrived at the numbers. We saw 1 billion for railroads. Why is it 1 billion? Why not 2 billion? Why not half a billion? And the last thing that's missing is how does government policy is being reflected in those numbers? How does the values that the parties that form the government show in that budget? Because if they're not showing, then we could have voted for anyone. So I want to see exactly what they are doing to make a change. It's interesting whether I support them or not, because that's the main idea here. So let's start with the structure of the budget. And one thing important to understand, we can think about the budget. It's logical that we have education and defense, and right, it's a logical kind of separation, but most of the budget's structure is very much a political decision. And usually you would say, okay, form follows function. You have an education ministry, you have to have a budget item that funds the education ministry. But it also goes the other way around. For example, in Israel we have the Israeli Broadcasting Authority. And it usually is sort of a consolation prize for a minister that didn't get anything else, or sometimes Prime Minister wants to hold it close. So it moves from ministry to ministry. It doesn't belong to any specific ministry, but rather to the one that wants to be able to fund it and give it personnel. So this sort of function moves inside the budget according to all kinds of political decisions. Another example is the depth inside the budget. We said that the budget is like a tree, but are we close to the leaves or close to the trunk? It really depends on a multitude of factors, but the closer you are to the branches, the less supervision you have. This is by law. So if you want to fund an activity that you want it to be less supervised, you push it down the budget tree, all to the way to the branches. We're seeing it inside Israel's budget in various places. And well, there's another issue that sometimes activities get their own budget item. Sometimes activities don't. Sometimes they're like spread over the entire budget. If you want something to be somehow under the radar in a way that, oh crap. If you want something to be under the radar in a way that it would be very difficult for people to actually know how much you're funding it, then go ahead, spread it along over multitude of budget items. It would be very hard to follow. So the way the budget is built and structured is very much a political decision. So I'll give you a few examples in the 10 minutes I have left. This is one of the views of the budget key project, which I'm developing. I'll need the shown here. So here we're seeing that each bubble represents one budget item, and the way we are somehow tackling the problem with the budget structure is that instead of looking at the budgets as a whole or separated to ministries, we can now group it according to some specific themes or categories. For example, social services. So if we want to know how much is going for social services as a whole, we can take a look at the entire group instead of just ministry by ministry and starting to sum them. This is a bad example, also from a website I built, but it's 5 years ago. So here, for example, I'm looking for the social services ministry. I'm seeing here a graph which gives us the amount of money allocated. And you see that in 2004, there was a very large cut. So it's starting to think, okay, who was in office? Why did they cut? What happened there? What was the government policy? And in fact, none of these questions is even relevant, because the truth of the matter is that what happened is that the part of the social services ministry that handles employment was simply moved to another ministry. So I have here a graph which gives us a very bad feeling about a very terrible cut that was done in social services, but in fact this is a lie. And the one worst thing that a visualization can do from being useless is, to give you false data and even a false sense of what's going on. So not paying attention to the structure of the budget is really, it's really doing a bad job. Okay, where are the numbers coming from? This is the second thing that I need to know. And as we've seen, not knowing where the numbers are coming from really hurts our ability to understand the budgets. Because when we look at, for example, £1 billion for railroads, it's usually a sum of all kinds of things. Could be previous commitments. We already committed to building a railroad between, Essex and, So this is one part of the 1 billion that we're funding. Maybe new laws and regulations were introduced that somehow force us to fund more money. For example, if every student needs to get a warm meal every Sunday, then we'll have to fund that. It really depends on various multipliers. For example, Ministry of Education really depends on the number of students. We don't know the number of students, then the number of the amount of money that is given as a whole to the Ministry of Education is really meaningless. We need to know the money per student. And then all kinds of assumptions and projections. If we're dependent on currencies, or there's some room for risk at every budget. So if we don't know these assumptions, again, it's meaningless. Another way to look at it is a global cap. For example, we need to, sometimes government decides, okay, I want to spend 20% of my budget just to return national debt. If we don't know that number, then again, it's meaningless. And The truth of the matter is that I didn't see any budget website today that even remotely answers any of these questions. Why are the numbers like they are? So this is very saddening, but I don't have an example to show you. The last point that is missing from visualizations is how budget reflects policy. And here, I think it's the most important part, is how do we focus the visualization on what's really important and what the government can change? Because one thing important to understand about budgets is the distinction between mandatory spending and discretionary spending. Mandatory is all the stuff that the government has to spend. You know, it has to pay pension funds and it has to pay salaries for government workers. It's committed to all kinds of projects. They can't change that. But there is still a little bit of money that they can repurpose every year to according to their beliefs and values. And this is the money that we should be focusing on. Another way to understand policy is to see who gets the money. In Israel, for example, if under the education budget article, you can see money flowing to more religious schools or maybe less religious schools, depending on who's in office. And lastly, if you can monitor appropriations in real time, you see the budget decisions being made in real time, you can understand what reasoning is behind them and how is it done. So I'll show you two examples of how it's done, and we'll call it a day. So this is a visualization that was done by the New York Times showing the proposal for the 2013 Obama budget. You can see where we got some of our inspiration. And what you can see here is the big circle represents the entire budget, but very quickly you can just split it to the mandatory spending, which is on the left, which is not interesting, and the discretionary spending, which is on the right, which is the interesting part. Then you can focus on that discretionary spending and see what changes were made by the Obama administration in that specific area in the discretionary. So this is a very good example of how to focus on what's important and just disregard the stuff that doesn't matter. See, it just goes away. In Israel, we don't have that distinction, unfortunately. We have all the budget, but we don't know what's discretionary and what's mandatory. But we do have the system that after the budget is approved, it's being changed very thoroughly by the government. So in our visualization, we use that fact, and we show here what budget items got changed the most and got money. These are the red ones. And on the other hand, the blue ones on the bottom are the ones that got cut heavily and lost most of the money. And if we split or group this chart according to the categories, we can actually see which kind of which areas got cut the most and which areas got funded the most. For example, we can see that in our case, support for the elderly got cut, but maybe construction got funded during the year. So this is a way to show mandatory and discretionary spending. Here we can see on the timeline the changes. You can see the green line is the base budget, and each one of the red lines, the deep red lines, is a change. So you can see that some budget articles are really changed over the year, and it's not to see that changes and the change in the budget is really important. Now, what's nice to see here is that the red flashing line in the end is actually a change that hasn't been made yet. So I can voice my concern if I'm not happy about it, or I can show my support if I'm happy about it, and somehow I'm able to take part in this appropriation process before it's made. Okay, so to sum up, and these are my takeaways from my presentation. First of all, you have to ask the right questions. I know this is a visualization cliche, but when you talk about budget data, asking the wrong questions can give you not only a useless visualization, but also a visualization that is discouraging and that doesn't give you the willpower to actually look at data, at the budget data. And also it can give you almost lies, like I've shown you before in the original website. You have to make opinionated visualizations. Make sure that you know what you want to show, which are the important questions, and don't be shy about it. Feel free to discard unimportant data like we saw in the Obama chart. Just throw it away and focus on what's important. And if you can make your visualization actionable, then it's a great win. If you can make the people that are watching the visualization do something outside of their laptop, then you really got it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have time for one question because we want you guys to drink coffee and stuff like that. Do we have one question? One question.
Hi Adam.
Hi.
We were working on as you maybe know, that when I was we were working on a similar project with a local budget for municipalities in Israel, and it's great to see your project. I've been following it, and one of the great challenges we found is what you were talking about is the huge gap between what the questions that are important to the public, to the simple people, and the information that they can base their opinions on and make decisions, compared to what's in the budget structure, how it's structured, the actual naming of budget items, which can be very, very far away and very generic. And for example, like the budget of the Ministry of Interior versus the interest of the simple person of what's happening. So the education of my own children right outside of my house. So, and since you mentioned also that the government is using the budget also to manipulate what's your thoughts on how do you address this challenge? Not actually make visualizations that are just serving these manipulations, but actually like giving tools to criticize and answer the simple questions, so people can base their opinions.
Okay, so I think that in such cases, showing the data alone will never be enough, because government can always give you bad data, and you have to have some kind of layer. You can call it annotation layer, you can call it user-generated content or expert-generated content, but you have to have some kind of data that really mediates some of the. You have to have some layer that mediates some of the data to a more understandable language. So in one of our projects, we actually had one of the major economic newspapers here help us and write explanations for all budget items, translating the government lingo into a more understandable lingo. But you can also have layers that are done by multiple parties, each one with its own point of view or maybe agenda. The fact that we're separating here, to social services ministries, it's also a point of view. You can argue that this separation is not the correct one, and maybe you want to do another separation. You want to focus on periphery, or maybe you want to focus on elderly people and how much they're getting. So you have to have some mediation layer, and I think it's becoming more and more important to be able to annotate the data and to be able not to just add text, but also to act upon it. For example, separate it, or maybe compare it to a different data set that is provided by users. So do some kind of analysis with context above the data, help you understand it.
Thank you very much. So